The journey back to Baker Street was a stark contrast to our somber trip to the countryside. The discovery at Vance Manor had ignited a fire in Holmes, a restless, almost feral energy that transformed him from a contemplative philosopher into a creature of pure, focused action. The name scrawled on the mirror, Moran, had been the spark, and now his mind was a raging inferno of deduction and speculation. He spoke little during the carriage ride, his gaze fixed on the passing London streets, but I could see the mental cogs turning at a furious pace. He drummed his long, slender fingers on the valise containing his chemical apparatus, a rhythmic, impatient beat that echoed the racing of his thoughts. The game had changed, escalated from a curious puzzle to a deadly confrontation, and Holmes was reveling in the challenge. "The name, Watson, the name," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the rhythmic clatter of the carriage wheels. "That is the key that will unlock this entire affair. Moran. It is not a common name, and in the context of a military vendetta, it is a name that rings with a certain dark resonance." "You know of this Moran, then?" I asked, intrigued by his sudden animation. "I know of a Moran," he replied, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Colonel Sebastian Moran, formerly of Her Majesty's Indian Army. A big game hunter, a crack shot, a man of iron nerve and dissolute habits, and most significantly, a man whose name has been whispered in the darkest corners of the London underworld as the chief of staff to the most dangerous criminal mind in Europe." The name he spoke next sent a chill down my spine, a name that was synonymous with a vast invisible web of organized crime that stretched across the city. Professor Moriarty. I stared at him, astonished. Moriarty, the Napoleon of crime, was a figure Holmes spoke of with a mixture of professional respect and profound loathing. He was the hidden power behind 100 crimes, a man of immense intellect and absolute ruthlessness, a spider at the center of a web of villainy. "Moriarty," I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. "You believe this case is connected to him?" "I believe it is more than possible," Holmes said, his voice low and intense. "Moriarty's organization is a vast and complex machine. He has his fingers in every illegal enterprise in this city. If a secret society of vengeful soldiers were to form, a society with the discipline and audacity to kidnap a nobleman from his own home, it is highly likely that Moriarty would either be behind it or would seek to control it for his own purposes. And a man like Colonel Moran would be the perfect instrument for such a task." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. "This is no longer just about a debt of honor from a forgotten war, Watson. This is about the here and now. The Crimson Shadow is not just a symbol of past grievances. It is a banner under which a new and dangerous army is gathering, an army led by one of Moriarty's most trusted lieutenants. We are not just dealing with a handful of disgruntled soldiers. We are on the verge of uncovering a branch of Moriarty's own criminal empire." The implications of his words were staggering. We had stumbled into something far larger, far more dangerous than we had ever imagined. The search for a missing lord had become a battle against the most formidable criminal organization in the world. Back in the familiar comfort of our Baker Street rooms, Holmes wasted no time. He shed his traveling coat and immediately began to pace the room, his mind a whirlwind of activity. He pulled down dusty ledgers and scrapbooks from his shelves, his personal encyclopedia of crime, and began to cross-reference names, dates, and events with a feverish intensity. "The regiment, Watson, the regiment," he muttered, his fingers flying across the pages. "Lady Vance mentioned her husband served in India. We must identify the regiment, find the names of the officers, the details of the betrayal she spoke of. The truth lies buried in the archives of the past." For the rest of the evening, he was a man possessed. The air in our rooms grew thick with the smoke from his pipe and the dust from his old records. He worked with a silent, focused fury, occasionally uttering a triumphant "aha!" or a frustrated groan as he pieced together the fragments of the puzzle. By midnight, he had found it. He pushed aside a pile of books and spread out a large hand-drawn chart on the table. It was a complex web of names and lines, connecting Lord Henry Vance to a specific regiment, the Royal Munster Fusiliers, and to a notorious incident that had occurred during the Second Afghan War, the payroll robbery at Quetta. "Here it is, Watson," he said, his voice ringing with the thrill of discovery. "The betrayal Lady Vance spoke of. A payroll of £50,000, intended for the soldiers of the regiment, was stolen. The official report, written by the commanding officer, a man named Colonel Armitage, blamed a group of local tribesmen. But there were rumors, whispers of a cover-up, of a conspiracy among the officers themselves." He pointed to a name on the chart. Lord Henry Vance was a young lieutenant in the regiment at the time, and serving alongside him as his second-in-command was another young officer, Captain Sebastian Moran. The pieces were falling into place, forming a dark and sinister picture. "So, Vance and Moran served together," I said, "and this payroll robbery was the source of the grievance." "Precisely," Holmes replied. "My hypothesis is this. The robbery was not committed by tribesmen, but by a group of the officers themselves, led by the ruthless and cunning Moran. They framed the local population, and perhaps even some of their own men, for the crime. Lord Vance, a man of conscience, was likely a reluctant participant, or perhaps he discovered the truth and was silenced. For years, he has lived with the guilt of his involvement, while the common soldiers who were cheated out of their pay have nursed a burning desire for revenge." He began to pace the room again, his voice filled with a grim energy. "And now, years later, those soldiers have found a leader. They have formed a secret society, the Crimson Shadow, and they are hunting down the men who betrayed them. And who better to lead them than the arch-traitor himself, Colonel Sebastian Moran, a man who has honed his skills in the service of Professor Moriarty." The theory was both brilliant and terrifying. It explained everything: the secrecy, the symbolism, the personal nature of the vendetta. "But what is Moran's motive?" I asked. "Why would he lead a group of men who are, in essence, seeking revenge against himself?" "A classic misdirection, my dear Watson," Holmes said with a thin smile. "Moran is not leading them to revenge. He is leading them to their doom. He is using their legitimate grievances for his own ends. Perhaps he is eliminating his former partners in crime, tying up loose ends from his past. Or perhaps he is simply using this society as a new weapon in Moriarty's arsenal. A private army of desperate men who can be manipulated and controlled." He stopped his pacing and turned to me, his eyes alight with a new resolve. "The official records will only take us so far. To find the truth, We must descend into the belly of the beast. We must go to the places where men like Moran conduct their business, where secrets are bought and sold, where the whispers of the underworld can be heard by those who know how to listen. He strode to his bedroom and returned a few moments later with a small, battered trunk. He opened it to reveal a bewildering array of costumes and disguises. The rough tweeds of a common laborer, the tattered rags of a beggar, the gaudy finery of a drunken sailor. "Tonight, Watson," he announced, a mischievous glint in his eye, "we go fishing, and the waters we will be fishing in are the murkiest and most dangerous in all of London. I am going to pay a visit to the Blue Lantern, an opium den in the East End, a place where a man can lose his fortune, his health, and his soul, all in a single night. It is a known haunt of Moran's associates, a place where the name of the Crimson Shadow may be known." He selected the costume of a down-on-his-luck merchant seaman, a man whose face was etched with the hardships of a life at sea. With a few deft touches of makeup, a change of posture, and a slurring of his speech, the transformation was complete. The sharp, intellectual Sherlock Holmes vanished, replaced by a shuffling, world-weary mariner. "And you, Watson," he said, turning to me, "will accompany me. Not as a participant, but as an observer. It is important that you see this world, that you understand the depths to which men can sink. But you must be careful. Say nothing. Do nothing. Simply watch and listen." I confess my heart beat a little faster at the prospect. I had accompanied Holmes on many strange and dangerous adventures, but a journey into the notorious opium dens of the East End was a new and daunting experience. It was a world far removed from my comfortable life as a physician, a world of shadows and secrets that I had only read about in the pages of sensational novels. We took a hansom cab to the edge of Whitechapel, a district that was a world away from the elegant squares and crescents of the West End. Here, the streets were narrow and grimy, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and cheap gin. The buildings leaned against each other for support, their windows dark and unwelcoming. Figures lurked in the shadows of alleyways, their faces pale and ghostly in the gaslight. Holmes led me down a labyrinth of winding cobbled streets to a narrow, unassuming doorway, above which hung a single blue-tinted lantern. There was no sign, no indication of the business conducted within. It was a place that did not advertise its presence, a place for those who were already in the know. The moment we stepped inside, we were hit by a wave of thick, sweet-smelling smoke that clogged the air and made my eyes water. The room was long and low-ceilinged, filled with wooden bunks arranged in tiers. On each bunk lay a figure, some curled up in a deep, drugged sleep, others staring blankly at the ceiling, their faces gaunt and expressionless. The only light came from a few flickering oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was filled with the low murmur of voices, the occasional cough, and the soft, bubbling sound of the opium pipes. It was a scene of human misery and degradation, a living tableau of lost souls seeking oblivion in the fumes of the poppy. Holmes, in his guise as a drunken sailor, seemed perfectly at home. He shuffled over to the proprietor, a large, greasy man with a flat, expressionless face, and exchanged a few slurred words and a handful of coins. The proprietor nodded and gestured towards an empty bunk in a dark corner of the room. As Holmes settled onto the bunk, I took a seat on a nearby stool, trying to make myself as inconspicuous as possible. I felt a profound sense of unease, a feeling of being an intruder in a private hell. The men in the room were from all walks of life, from grizzled sailors and laborers to well-dressed gentlemen who had clearly fallen on hard times. They were united by a common addiction, a shared desire to escape the harsh realities of their lives. Holmes, for his part, seemed to be in no hurry. He lit his pipe, his movements slow and deliberate, and began to engage in a low, rambling conversation with the man in the bunk next to him. A thin, twitchy individual with hollow eyes and trembling hands. For what seemed like an eternity, I listened to their conversation, a disjointed and often incoherent exchange about the price of opium, the hardships of life at sea, and the general injustice of the world. Holmes played his part to perfection, his voice a drunken slur, his laughter a hollow, rasping sound. Then, with a casualness that was a masterpiece of acting, he introduced the topic he had come for. "A man can't be too careful in this city these days," he slurred, his voice just loud enough for me to overhear. "Too many gangs, too many secret societies. A friend of mine, he got on the wrong side of a new lot, the ones who call themselves the Crimson Shadow. A nasty bunch, I hear." The man in the next bunk stiffened, his eyes, which had been dull and lifeless, suddenly sharpened with a flicker of fear. "You'd be wise to keep your voice down, friend," he whispered, his eyes darting around the room. "That's not a name to be spoken lightly in a place like this." "Oh?" Holmes said, his voice a mixture of drunken curiosity and bravado. "And why is that? They're just a bunch of old soldiers, aren't they? Grumbling about the past." The man leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "They're more than that. They're organized, they're ruthless, and they're led by a devil, a man who knows every dark secret in this city. They say he's the right hand of the professor himself." "The professor?" Holmes asked, feigning ignorance. "Moriarty," the man breathed, the name a curse on his lips. "And the man who leads the shadow. They call him the Colonel. A hard man, a dangerous man. He's been seen in this very den, meeting with some of the ugliest customers in London. They say he's recruiting, building an army." "An army?" Holmes said, his voice laced with skepticism. "What for?" The man shrugged, his brief moment of clarity fading as the opium fumes once again clouded his mind. "Who knows? Who cares? All I know is, you don't cross the Colonel. You don't even speak his name. The last man who did. He was found in the Thames a week later, with a crimson mark painted on his forehead. He trailed off, his eyes glazing over, and a moment later he was lost once more in his private, drug-fueled world." Holmes had what he came for. He had confirmed his theory. The Crimson Shadow was indeed led by a man known as the Colonel, and that man was connected to Moriarty. He had also learned that they were actively recruiting, that they were a force to be reckoned with in the London underworld. But our visit was not yet over. As Holmes made a show of preparing to leave, a new figure entered the den. He was a tall, powerfully built man with a swarthy complexion and a fierce black mustache. He wore the rough clothes of a dock worker, but he moved with a military bearing that was impossible to disguise. His eyes, small and hard as pebbles, swept the room with a look of cold authority. He was not looking for opium. He was looking for someone. His gaze fell on Holmes, who was shuffling towards the door, and for a moment the two men's eyes met. I saw a flicker of recognition in the newcomer's eyes, a sudden dangerous glint. He knew Holmes, or at least he knew the man Holmes was pretending to be. The man took a step forward, his hand reaching inside his coat. But Holmes was too quick for him. In a single, fluid motion, he stumbled, as if in a drunken stupor, and crashed into a nearby table, sending a tray of opium pipes and lamps clattering to the floor. The den was thrown into chaos. The proprietor shouted in anger, and the dazed occupants of the bunks stirred, their peaceful stupor shattered. In the confusion, Holmes grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the door. "Time to leave, Watson," he hissed, his voice no longer the slurred drawl of a sailor, but the sharp, urgent command of the master detective. "Our presence has been noted." We burst out of the den and into the cold night air, the sounds of shouting and confusion behind us. We didn't stop to look back, but plunged into the labyrinth of dark, narrow streets, our footsteps echoing on the wet cobblestones. We had delved into the underworld and emerged with the information we sought. But we had also alerted our enemies to our interest. The shadow had a face now, and that face was looking for us. The hunt had become a two-way street. We were no longer just the hunters. We were also the hunted. And as we made our way back to the relative safety of Baker Street, I knew that the next move in this deadly game would be a dangerous one indeed. The whispers of the underworld had spoken, and they had warned us of a storm that was about to break over the city of London.